The crowd buzzed with an energy so intense it felt almost alive, pulsing through the arena like an unrelenting tide. The air shimmered with anticipation, every spectator leaning forward as if they could physically pull time closer to the moment when two of the greatest fighters in history would step into the ring. It wasn't just another fight. It was a battle of legacies, a collision of worlds. Canelo Alvarez, the Mexican powerhouse with an iron will, and Terrence "Bud" Crawford, the master technician who seemed to see 3 moves ahead of anyone he faced. Styles made fights, and this was a clash that had been debated for years, dissected in barbershops, boxing gyms, and online forums alike. Now, there was no more speculation. It was happening. Canelo stood in his locker room, his hands wrapped tightly, his knuckles hidden beneath layers of gauze and tape, like weapons waiting to be unleashed. His face, calm and unreadable, revealed none of the fire that had carried him through wars in the ring. He had heard the talk, the whispers that Crawford's speed, his adaptability, would be too much. But Canelo had spent his entire career proving doubters wrong. He had walked through the fire of the best fighters in multiple divisions, never backing down, never breaking. This was just another test, another night where the world would remember why his name commanded respect. On the other side of the arena, Crawford moved with the same quiet confidence that had made him one of the most feared men in the sport. There was no bravado, no need for theatrics. He had built his reputation through dominance, through a style so fluid it was as if he fought on instinct alone. Southpaw or orthodox, inside or outside, he dictated the terms of engagement. And tonight, he intended to prove that no matter how strong, how durable, how relentless Canelo was, there was always a way to dismantle a fighter. You just had to find the right moment. The cameras captured everything. Fans watching from home could see the subtle differences in their demeanors, the way Canelo's expression was carved from stone, while Crawford's lips curled slightly in that almost smile that only appeared when he was about to do something special. Commentators filled the silence with analysis, breaking down reach, power, footwork. But all of that was theory. The truth would only be found under the bright lights, in the heat of battle. The walkouts began. The arena exploded in sound, chants rising from every section, a sea of flags and colors blending together into one roaring storm. Canelo's entrance was a spectacle, a wave of red, white, and green washing over the crowd as mariachi music blended with the heavy thud of bass. He walked with the poise of a man who had seen it all, felt every possible emotion that could exist in the moments before a fight. Across the ring, Crawford's walk was a study in quiet menace. His eyes locked ahead, his body loose yet coiled, like a predator that had spotted its prey. They met at the center of the ring, inches apart now, no longer separated by interviews, speculation, or highlights. This was real. The referee spoke, but neither man truly heard him. Their focus was solely on each other, the unspoken promise of violence hanging in the space between them. The final instructions were given. The crowd held its breath. Then the bell rang. Canelo moved first, his gloves coming up as he stepped forward, testing the distance with a slight feint. Crawford didn't bite. He simply watched, his posture loose, his body relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. The first jab came, Canelo's left hand shooting out like a piston, sharp and fast. Crawford slipped it effortlessly, barely moving his head as he circled to his right. It was the smallest exchange, but the intent behind it was clear. They weren't just throwing punches. They were calculating. The rhythm of the fight started to form. Canelo pressed forward, his feet steady, every move deliberate. He wasn't reckless. He never was. But he was determined to impose himself, to make Crawford feel the weight of every punch, every angle. But Crawford was a ghost, disappearing just before impact, his footwork carrying him to safety, before countering with a crisp jab of his own. The crowd reacted to every feint, every moment of tension where one wrong move could lead to disaster. Then came the first real shot. Canelo ducked under a flickering jab and ripped a left hook to the body, his signature weapon, the punch that had folded countless opponents in half. It landed flush, the thud of leather on flesh echoing through the arena. Crawford's face barely changed, but his movement told the truth. He felt it. He stepped back, reset, eyes narrowing for just a second. That was all Canelo needed to see. He pressed harder. Another shot to the ribs, another hook, this time upstairs, grazing the side of Crawford's head as he dipped just in time. Canelo was cutting off the ring now, backing Crawford toward the ropes, forcing the kind of fight he wanted. A war of attrition, a test of endurance. But just as it seemed Crawford was being cornered, something shifted. A sudden pivot. A burst of speed. Crawford spun out, his right foot digging into the canvas as he slipped past Canelo's left side and launched a short right uppercut that snapped Canelo's head back for the first time in the fight. The reaction was immediate. The crowd roared, sensing the shift in momentum. Canelo took a step back, blinking as if recalculating. Crawford didn't follow. He stood his ground, a small smirk flashing across his face before disappearing just as quickly. The message was clear. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to take everything. The next round started faster. Canelo was more aggressive now, his punches coming in heavier, but Crawford had already found his rhythm. He was switching stances fluidly, using angles that forced Canelo to hesitate for half a second longer than he wanted to. Every time Canelo got close enough to unleash, Crawford made him pay with pinpoint counters, sharp, punishing, and precise. The game of inches was being played at the highest level. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Midway through the fourth round, Canelo threw a looping overhand right, a shot designed to break through Crawford's guard. But instead of dodging, Crawford did something unexpected. He stepped in. Slipping just under the punch, he closed the distance so quickly that even Canelo seemed momentarily surprised. And then, in an instant, Crawford launched a short left hook from an impossible angle, one that caught Canelo directly on the chin. The impact was brutal. Canelo's legs stiffened for a split second before he stumbled back, forced to clench as the crowd erupted. For the first time in years, Canelo looked affected. It wasn't just the punch. It was the timing, the precision, the audacity. Crawford wasn't fighting to win on points. He was fighting to end it. But Canelo wasn't just any opponent. As the referee separated them, his eyes burned with something different now. Not frustration, not fear. Something far more dangerous. The realization that he was in the kind of fight he had always wanted. Canelo steadied himself, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the effects of that perfectly placed counter. He had been hit before, harder than most people could imagine, but this was different. It wasn't just power. It was precision, timing, and a level of control that forced him to adjust. Across the ring, Crawford didn't press forward immediately. He stood still for a moment, eyes locked onto his opponent, waiting to see what Canelo would do next. It was a battle not just of fists, but of wills, and neither man was willing to blink first. The fifth round began with a shift in tempo. Canelo no longer marched forward with the same relentless pressure. Instead, he moved with a patience that only came from experience. He was setting traps now, giving Crawford just enough space to step in, to engage only to counter with his own precision. A sharp right hand landed clean, snapping Crawford's head back, This time, it was Crawford who nodded, acknowledging the shot, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he responded instantly, slipping under Canelo's follow-up hook and digging a left to the body. The crowd could feel it. The fight was reaching its boiling point. Both men were no longer just testing each other. They were going for it. Every exchange carried weight. Every punch was calculated to do real damage. Crawford's movement remained smooth, but now Canelo was cutting off his exits with razor-sharp footwork. The Mexican fighter had spent his career learning how to break down slick, elusive opponents, and now that knowledge was being put to the test against perhaps the greatest switch hitter the sport had ever seen. Then, in the 7th round, came the moment that would be replayed for years to come. Canelo feinted a right hook to the body, drawing Crawford's guard downward for just a fraction of a second. That was all he needed. The uppercut came like a lightning strike, landing clean under Crawford's chin with brutal force. The impact sent shockwaves through the crowd as Crawford staggered for the first time in the fight. His legs stiffened, his balance momentarily lost. Canelo pounced. A left hook followed, then a thudding right hand that sent Crawford back against the ropes. The crowd was on its feet, roaring as Canelo pressed forward, sensing the moment to finish. But just as he threw the next punch, Crawford did something unthinkable. He let the shot graze past him, rolling with it just enough to minimize the impact, and in one seamless motion, he countered with a right hook so perfectly timed that it caught Canelo mid-attack. The force twisted Canelo's body, sending him stumbling sideways. It wasn't just a recovery, it was a statement. For the first time, both men had been hurt. Both had tasted the other's power. And yet, neither was willing to go down. The final rounds were a masterpiece of grit and adaptation. Canelo dug into his relentless pressure, walking through counters to land punishing shots to the body. Crawford, ever the strategist, adjusted on the fly, setting traps, timing his movements with surgical precision. The fight had become something beyond just skill. It was about resilience, the kind of battle that defined legacies. As the last round began, the tension was suffocating. The crowd knew they were witnessing something historic. The final moments were a blur of sweat and motion, Canelo attacking with everything he had left, Crawford answering with sharp, punishing counters. When the final bell rang, both men stood in the center of the ring, breathing heavily, staring at each other with something that could only be described as respect. The judge's decision came, but in the end, it almost didn't matter. Regardless of the official outcome, the world knew what they had just witnessed. A fight for the ages. A war between two of the greatest. And as they stood there, battered but unbroken, one thing was certain: boxing had just delivered another moment that would never be forgotten.